Hi. As we are going through this quarantine, sometimes we go through these phases where we feel kind of bored and we have a sense of emptiness. What do we do with that sense of boredom and emptiness? That is what I want to talk about today. So I'm Reverend Emmanuel, and in this channel I like to talk about theology, culture, and spirituality. When last time I did a video on quarantine spirituality, it was about facing our fears. How do we face our fears from a point of view of Christian spirituality? I'll place a link for that video in the description below, so you can go watch it when you want to. And now I want to talk about the idea of feeling bored and empty during this time of quarantine. I was talking to this friend of mine the other day, and he said, hey, when this quarantine started, I was so happy because I had so much time, so I could go watch all these TV shows that I wanted to watch. I could read all the stuff, and then eventually everything started to get very, very boring, right? Because you just did the same thing over and over again, and he'd watched all the TV shows he wanted, and just watching more TV shows wasn't satisfying. So because of all this boredom, there was a sense of emptiness to his life. When we get into that space of kind of boredom resulting in emptiness, we get into a sense of scatterbrainedness, like we are not able to focus on anything that motivates us. We are not able to focus on anything that gives us meaning and purpose. In the medieval times, they used to call it the state of scatterbrainedness, acedia, or sometimes they would call it the noonday devil, which is that nothing is wrong with our life. Everything seems okay. It's not like you're facing a huge financial crisis or a health crisis, but it just seems like life seems empty. Life seems meaningless, everything. It's difficult to find motivation, and they call it the noonday devil. So, how do we, when we find ourselves being bored and losing motivation, how do we deal with that? So, there is a psychologist called Paul Wong. He says, one of the most important skills that we need to be able to deal with the sense of this time of quarantine and the sense of boredom or emptiness that we may feel is a sense of what he calls self-transcendence. What is self-transcendence? Self-transcendence is the ability to kind of rise up from kind of the preoccupations of ourself, right? So what are the preoccupations of self? Sometimes we find ourselves in a space where we are maybe sad or angry, and if we get too preoccupied, too focused on that, the thing that we focus on kind of begins to expand and become bigger. And eventually it becomes so big that it becomes like this mind fog that so captivates us and kind of imprisons us. Self-transcendence is the opposite. You move out of the space of self kind of preoccupation with self and move into a new space, a space in which you find a bigger sense of meaning and purpose in something that is bigger than who you are, right? So that is self-transcendence. When we look at the Bible, there is a wonderful story that kind of encapsulates this sense of God calling His people to a sense of self-transcendence when they are in a place of despair and losing motivation. It comes actually in the book of Jeremiah. So Jeremiah is a prophet who is witnessing Jerusalem as it is being destroyed by Babylon, and people are being taken into exile. In fact, Jeremiah is so distraught about that he is often called the weeping prophet, because he weeps over the destruction of Jerusalem. And at that point, God tells him something interesting. God tells Jeremiah in chapter 31, hey, as the Babylonian army is destroying Jerusalem and there's nothing left, God tells Jeremiah, go and buy land. Invest in a land, buy this place, right? And Jeremiah sits there and thinks, what's this about, buying this land, when this land seems absolutely worthless because the Babylonians have destroyed everything, right? And God has an important principle here. God says, I'm going to send you all on exile to Babylon, and then I'm going to bring you back in 70 years, right? So I'm going to use this time of exile to repurpose the people of Israel for God's purposes. And I'm going to bring you back in 70 years. And at that point, for that future, you kind of have to buy this land, right? So the principle here is Jeremiah has to transcend out of his self-absorption, has to find his satisfaction in this bigger purpose that God is calling him to. The bigger purpose is that he has to invest in the future promise that God is making for him in the present. Invest in the present for a future purpose. Invest in the present for a future hope, right? So that's the sense of self-transcendence that God is calling Jeremiah to. So here's the question. How does this apply to us? As we are living in this time of quarantine, in a sense, we are kind of in this sense of exile, right? We've kind of, the regular way of life is all kind of gone, and we are kind of living in the sense of new normal. And what God is telling us is, this sense of exile or this sense of quarantine is not going to last forever. God promises that He's going to bring us back out of this. And when He does that, He wants us to be repurposed for the purposes that He wants us to live into. So, there is a writer called Frederick Buechner. He says, when we think about investing in God's call for our life, we have to think about it from kind of this mindset. What is the biggest desire that we have, and how does that fulfill the biggest need in the world? What is the deepest desire that God has given you, which fulfills the biggest need in the world? You see, God has made all of us in His image. And a part of that means we all have that creative potential given us by God. We all have some unique talents in us. We all have something unique that we can give to the people around us that makes the lives of people better, creates a kingdom of love and peace, right? When Jesus talks about the parable of the talents, this is kind of what He's getting at, right? He has given all of us talents that sometimes we bury deep within the ground and we don't think about it. But God is saying, dig up those talents and invest those talents in the future that God is calling us to. So I'll give you an example of how to think about this. You have to ask yourself two questions. One question is, what is the thing that you're most proud of? And the second question is, what is the thing about the world that really bothers you, that really ticks you off, that really makes you want to go and change that? And the place in which they both meet, that is the space of God's call for your life. And that's what Buechner means when he says the place of God's call is your deepest desire meeting the biggest need in the world. I'll give you a little story. So when you look at the life of Steve Jobs loved calligraphy, which is about writing with beautiful fonts. He loved the aesthetics around that, and so he studied that. And the thing that bothered him about the world is, so much of the technology world was about utility. It wasn't about aesthetics. It wasn't about creating beautiful things. So his desire was to create beautiful things, beautiful fonts. So he took that desire and fulfilled a need in the world of people wanting beautiful technology products, as against having this big, clunky technology products that was all about utilitarianism. So in finding that match is where he kind of found his own sense of calling, and he created the company Apple, as you all know. And some of you may be thinking, oh, that's kind of for Steve Jobs, that's probably not for me. No, you may not all of us will become Steve Jobs, not all of us may become Steve Jobs, but God has given all of us unique talents. For some people it may be 5 talents, for some people it may be 3, for some people it may be 1, and that's what Jesus talks about in the parable of the talents. So use this time to ask yourself, what is the gift that God has given you? For some of us it may be something like, we just like cooking good food for people. And we have so much joy in bringing people together around good food and finding people, giving people a sense of connection and allowing people to experience God's peace and rest around good food. that is a wonderful talent. So many people in the world need that sense of God's love coming to them in a form of just enjoying good food with people, right? And one of my talents that God has given me is my desire to teach. I like to read all these different books and take knowledge and distill it down in a way that is helpful for people, in a way that moves people closer to what God wants them to be, right? So which is why during this quarantine time, I've been doing more videos. I've had this channel for 4 years, over 4 years, I think. And I've tried to do videos before, but I never kind of got it going. But this quarantine time helped me to sit and say, okay, I want to take all of my gifts and try to make something useful that draws people closer to Jesus. And that's why I'm kind of doing this. So look at your own life. Ask God, okay, God, what is the future that God wants you to invest in? What is the call that God is making for you? What are the gifts that God has given you? What are you proud of? And what is the thing about the world that you want to make better? How is God drawing your heart to change something in the world, right? And when you find a match in that, invest in that future. And that's how you move away from a sense of self-absorption. As you're going through this quarantine, you may feel bored or angry or frustrated. You move away from that to a place of self-transcendence by investing in your talents so that those talents become seeds for future hope. So, dig up your talents and plant seeds for the future that God is calling you to. Dig up your talents and invest into the future that God is calling you to. And then you won't be bored. You'll be motivated, you'll find life meaningful, you'll find life purposeful, and you'll be living into the fullness that Jesus is calling you to. So, sometimes when we go through this, we may be afraid, we may be scared, and that happens to Jeremiah too. Jeremiah gets scared, and in chapter 33 of Jeremiah, he goes and asks God, what are you asking me to do? Asking me to invest in all these different things. And God says, hey, is anything impossible for me? Trust me. So ultimately where God is calling us to is to this place of trust, where we are willing to say, God, you're going to work everything well. All I have to do for now is dig up my talents and plant seeds for the future that you're calling me to. So that's all I have for today. In the second video about quarantine, that talks about how we deal with the sense of boredom and emptiness, and the solution is to get to a place of self-transcendence, which is to dig up the talents that God has given us and invest in the future that God is calling us to. So with that, I'm done for today. I'll do another video on quarantine spirituality in a week. If you like this video, please feel free to like it on YouTube, subscribe to my channel and click the bell button so that way you get notified every time, and feel free to share it. And if there's anything else that you want me to talk about, please let me know. I'll be happy to talk about that. Anyways, until I see you in another video, bye.